Я також хочу подякувати вам за те, що ви знайшли час прийти на сьогоднішню лекцію. Нагадаю, що це лекція в рамках паралельної програми лекційної до проекту «Динамічний музей». Ми вже мали нагоду познайомитися з лекціями Давіда Лорд-Кіпанідзе, Михайла Гнідовського. І наступним нашим лектором буде Ханс Мартін Хінц, президент ІКОМ. Лекція відбудеться у березні. Так само радо вас запрошую, користуючись нагодою. Стосовно сьогоднішнього нашого лекційного дня, ситуація буде виглядати таким чином. Ми матимемо лекцію на початку, після цього дискусію або сесію питань-відповідей, а після цього неформальне спілкування за кавою, куди теж дуже запрошуємо. Отже, починаємо з лекції. Я дуже рада передати слово Ксерксу, нашому гостю. Дякую.
Okay, everybody, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much indeed for your kind invitation. And I would also like to thank everyone here for, when I have visited your museums, your kindness in hosting me. So today, my talk, I passionately believe that as museum professionals, it is not enough to just put objects on display. When we display objects, they are a form of communication. Yes? And all communication needs two people. One person who communicates and the other person who receives that communication. Yes? As museum professionals, we generally only worry about the person who communicates. That is us. We put objects on display. We rarely worry about the visitors. We rarely think, what is the visitor's experience? What are they learning? What do they understand? 20 years ago, in the UK, we started to worry about our visitors. And today, I will be presenting you some of the findings that we have found and some of the things and the ways that we have found this. I will be showing you some techniques you can use in your museum. I will be showing you some of our results, so you do not need to practice, you do not need to research this in your museum. You can just learn from what we have done. Okay, so a lot of the work I will start with, we have done with a company, a private company called Morris Hargreaves McIntyre. So I would like to thank them for a lot of this work we have done. So we believe that our museum is there to promote visitors' engagement with our collection, with objects. That is one of the reasons we exist, the British Museum exists. So it is very important for us to know, what do we mean by visitors engaging with objects? Yes? And we have defined it as a three-stage process. So every visitor is attracted to an object, then the visitor engages with that object, and as a result of that engagement, there is an impact on the visitor. So it's a three-stage, very, very simple model. You can scale this up. You can make it bigger. So visitors are attracted to a showcase. They go into a room, they are attracted to a showcase. They engage with that showcase, there is an impact. They are attracted to a gallery. one room. Why do visitors go to one room and not another room? Okay, they engage with all the contents of that room. There is an impact. They are attracted to, at the biggest scale, a whole museum. What attracts visitors to your museum, but not your museum? What is their engagement with your whole museum, and what is the impact of that engagement? So you can see how this model can work. For me, I worry about the individual engagement. It can also work for people in marketing, because they worry about attract, engage, impact for a whole museum visit. I will now talk about the work we have done looking at why visitors come to museums and and how do they engage with the museum. And that is influenced by the motivation that visitors have. The thing that makes the biggest difference to how your visitors behave in your museum is their motivation for visiting. We say that there are 4 major categories of visitor motivation. And these are in your handout. Yep. Social, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And I will describe each of these in turn. I will first explain how we got to these categories. So this company, this private company, Morris Hargreaves McIntyre, asked many visitors to many museums. They asked people in museums of culture. They asked people in art museums, in science museums, in technology museums, in botanic gardens. Why are you visiting this museum? And people told them, in their own words, this is why I am visiting. They then categorized those into 15 different statements. They then grouped those 15 statements into 4 broad categories: social, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. So now we have a list of 15 statements we can show visitors. And we say to them, which of these reasons is why you have visited? And visitors will normally tick 3, 4 of them in maybe 2 categories. Then you can say, and which is the main reason you have visited? And visitors will find it very easy to say, this is the main reason I have visited the museum. So, I will now go through each of these categories. Social is when people come to the museum primarily to spend time with other people. It's a background for social engagement. Okay? And the statements that our visitors tick, here are some of them. We're coming because it is one of the major things to see in London. They're not coming because of our content. They're not necessarily coming to learn. They're coming because it's on the list of things to do for a social visit. It's a nice, enjoyable way to pass the time. It's a nice place to spend time with friends and family. So you get the idea, yes? The second category is intellectual. And intellectual people, or people motivated by an intellectual motivation, come to learn. They come to increase their understanding and to build up their facts. Okay? So they are keen to learn, to encourage either their children or themselves to learn. They may be professional in the subject. They may be professional art historians. They may be just exploring a personal interest, but they are coming to learn facts. So that is the intellectual motivation. The third one is emotional. And this is different from intellectual because, for example, if I want to see, yesterday I went to the Sophia Museum, the major cathedral museum, and if I went with an intellectual motivation, I would want to learn when was it built, how long did it take, what do these frescoes say? Yep. If I go for an emotional engagement, I would want to look at beautiful things in amazing surroundings. I would want to connect with the people who produced it in the past. I would want to say, what was it like to work here? What was it like to worship here in the past? I want to experience time travel. Yep, so that is the emotional connection. And you can see how it is different from intellectual. Yep. For emotional, people want to experience the past, or they may have a personal connection. We have objects from around the world. We often find that people who are second-generation Indians or from second-generation Pakistan or first-generation will want to come and look at objects because they have a personal connection with that culture. Yep. So the kinds of statements people make, I would like to experience what the past was like. I have a personal connection. It is connected to my identity. I want to have an emotionally moving experience. It's not about information, it's about emotion. Or to see beautiful things, again, it's about emotion. Yep. And then the fourth category, spiritual, that's not the right word for it because it makes it sound religious. It's not about religion. It's about people disconnecting from the world, escaping from the world. So people use museums as a way to leave their worries behind, to step into a different kind of environment where they can immerse themselves, they can stimulate their creativity. We say they can recharge their batteries. And so spiritual, visitors are looking for creative stimulation, quiet contemplation, and see museums as an opportunity to escape and recharge their batteries. And people might say that the statements they tick are stimulate my own creativity, peaceful, quiet contemplation. So, this is the proportion of different types of visitors we have in the British Museum. Just have a think before I show you. What percentage of people do you think come to our museum for a social, primarily social motivation? 60. So 60%. Any other suggestions? British Museum. 40. Okay, very good. It's 40. They were both very close. So, oh, you have it in your handouts, don't you? I just thought. Okay, right. So, I won't ask any more questions because you have the answers. So, as you can see, we are very pleased that we have about 2 out of every 5 visitors come for social reasons. about 2 out of 5 for intellectual reasons, and then 12% emotional, and a tiny number spiritual. This is very common for museums like the British Museum, which has a collection of beautiful cultural objects from many cultures. How do you think, if you are thinking of an art gallery, do you think these two categories are smaller or are larger? Larger, yes? And art galleries generally have a larger percentage spiritual, a larger percentage emotional. Yep. Science museums might have a larger percentage intellectual, for example. So you can do some interesting things with these. This is the profile for all our visitors to the British Museum. We have about 6 million visits a year, okay? Huge number. This is the profile for all of those. We also have special exhibitions. And you have to pay for the special exhibitions. And we also look at the profile for our special exhibitions. And as you will see from your handouts, I won't ask you, the big difference with a special exhibition, and this is a special exhibition we did several years ago on a Roman emperor, Hadrian. Our Hadrian exhibition, as you can see, when people are paying to come to an exhibition, their motivation changes completely. You have far fewer people who are just coming to spend time with friends and family. They are much more motivated to learn and to engage with the collection. So that is our first finding, our first really important finding. And I will come back in a moment to the difference between special temporary exhibitions and permanent displays. They are very, very different things, okay? But the first way they are different is that the general motivation of your visitors is different. We do more, though, than simply compare visitors to a special exhibition and visitors to the whole museum. Because when our visitors leave the special exhibition, we ask them, now you have visited, which of these 15 things did you achieve? And then, which was the main thing you achieved? So what we can get is what visitors tell us, the reasons they came, and then what visitors actually got from a visit. So we can learn how visitors' expectations were changed and whether they were met or exceeded. And as you can see, the main change, so this is the entry, this is when we asked people as they entered Hadrian, and this is when people left, and the main change is that far more visitors had an emotional experience than expected to have an emotional experience. We all, and this is probably the most important point of today, is that often in museums, we think one of our main purposes is to give visitors facts, to give them dates, to give them names of artists, to help them understand history, for example. Actually, what museums are fantastic at doing is engaging visitors emotionally. And we need to remember that. As museum professionals, museums are incredibly powerful emotionally because of the collections they have and because of the objects that we use, the real things we use to engage people. Now, there's something very interesting here, which is we've done this for many exhibitions, many exhibitions. And what we've discovered is that in order to have a good, solid emotional experience, visitors also need information. It's almost impossible for someone to engage emotionally with a subject without basic information. So people need to know, visitors need to know what they are looking at in order to achieve that. They need to know why this object is important. Is it because it is old? Is it because it is unique? They need to be encouraged to look carefully at things. With Hadrian, the Roman emperor, he had a very emotional story, actually. It was a completely fascinating life story, and visitors needed to engage with that as well as with the collection. So in order to have a strong emotional impact, you also need a lot of intellectual filling. Okay? So you only achieve this properly when you also give facts and ideas. So you need to museums need to do both. Okay, I'll move on to the next bit of my talk now, which is what else can we do with those 4 motivations: social, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. And the thing that we do at the British Museum is use them to divide up our visitors or to segment our visitors. And it is important to divide up all our visitors because otherwise we will be doing something for a generic visitor which does not exist. And all of you do it already. You don't do the same program for school children as you do for adults, for example. You change your program. So, we say that, we ask the question, the best way, how can we segment our visitors? And we segment them depending on what influences how they interact with the museum's objects. And the first thing that makes the biggest difference to how people interact is whether they are coming in a school group or not. Okay? So children coming in a school group, so the first question we ask, are you coming in a school group? If the answer is yes, we put you in a category, obviously, called schools. Because if you are coming in a school group, you have a very specific program which influences how you interact with the museum's collection. The next group is families. If you are coming in a family group, so yes, we put you in the second category, families, because, as you all know, if you are visiting with children, what influences the course of the visit most? The children, yes? And it's often the youngest child. If the youngest child has had enough, then actually your visit stops. So the pattern of a museum visit, the way you engage with the collections as a family, will be very dependent upon the children. Then everybody else is influenced by their motivation. What motivated them to visit influences how they behave in the museum. So the next question we ask is, what is your motivation? if you are motivated by a spiritual or emotional motivation, we put you in a category all by yourself. We call you an art lover. It is not the right word. It just seemed a bit strange to create a category called spiritual, emotional, motivated visitors. So we just called them art lovers for short. If anyone has a better word, please tell me afterwards. So these are people who come for an emotional engagement with the collection. And their whole behavior in the museum will be influenced by that. If you come for an intellectual motivation, then there's one more thing which allows us to divide visitors, because their experience will depend on their level of knowledge. If they are an expert, they will behave one way. They will go to the collections they know. They will study them carefully. If they are not an expert in that subject, they will behave very differently. They will move through the collection in a different way, and they will look at objects in a very different way. So we have two categories. If they are a specialist, we put them in the expert category. If they are non-specialist, we call them self-developers. And self-developers are an enormous category for the British Museum. They come primarily to learn. They are non-experts. They are not visiting as a school child, and they are not visiting as part of a family group. That is a really important category for us. And their behavior is determined by this motivation. Yes? Very logical, very clear. Finally, if people are coming for a social visit, the thing that allows us to separate them is whether they are coming for a first visit or it is part of a repeat visit. So maybe they are a regular visitor who just likes to spend time in your museum. In our museum, people come to have a cup of coffee, to meet friends, to wander around a bit. Yes, they will look at objects, but primarily they want to use it as a social experience, to chat to their friends or to meet someone who is joining them in London. So with social visitors, we say, how often have they been? If they've been before, we call them repeat social visitors. If it is their first time, we call them sightseers. So those are our 7 categories. This is roughly the percentage. As you can see, it's a couple of years old. It changes every now and again. Increasingly, we are getting more art lovers and fewer sightseers. Approximately a quarter of our visitors are coming as sightseers. So this is, 1 in 5 are coming as sightseers. So this is people who are coming for a social visit for the first time, and probably the only time, though we don't know. Almost, or just over a quarter, are coming as self-developers. We've talked about that. We have 10% repeat social visitors. A quarter of our visits are by families. This is, as you can see, this is a bit wonky, the pie chart. But the percentages are right. This is important for us because when we discovered this, it changed the way we thought about our visitors. Before we worked on this, we said we get 60%, between 60 and 70% of all our visitors come from outside the United Kingdom. So it is tempting to say that those visitors are tourists and their behavior is determined by tourist motivations. Okay? But what this shows is that only 1 in 5 people are coming as, if you like, as one-off social visitors. And people from abroad, overseas visitors, non-UK visitors, fit into all of these categories. So tourist is not a helpful category for us, because people from overseas can be deeply engaged self-developers. They can be people who are visiting your museum because they love looking at things and want that emotional connection. So for us, we do not talk about tourists, we talk about these categories. Okay. What about schools? Our schools is about 4% as well. I haven't put it in here because we get the second largest number of school visits a year in the UK, 230,000 school visits. But because our numbers are so enormous, the percentage looks quite small. But thank you for that question. Okay. I will move on to the next bit now of my talk. We've talked about how visitors enter the museum and what motivates them and what influences how they use the museum. Now let's look at different ways people use our museums. And I will introduce you to some useful ways of thinking about how visitors use the museum. The first one is, how do visitors move through an exhibition or gallery space? And there are 4 categories that we use: browser, follower, searcher, and researcher. A browser is a visitor who just looks at one painting there, then maybe that one there, then this one here, then they walk to the next room. They butterfly around the gallery, like a butterfly. They perch, look, and move on to the next room. A follower will follow the narrative or the story or the order of your display. They will start here, they normally turn left. They will start here and they will go all around the room. They will make sure they look at everything and then they will move on. A searcher will be more selective but will also follow the narrative, but will be more selective in which bits. So they will tend to classify as they are going along. Right, I have seen the paintings, now I need to look at the sculptures. So they put more structure into it. And the most structured are the researchers, the people who are very clear what they want to look at, and they will head straight for that. I have come to look at 18th century aristocratic painting, so I will go and look at that. And I will look at the 4 I have studied. I am a researcher. And we look at how our visitors use our permanent displays. And we do it, and you, I think, have this on your slides, we do it by watching visitors. Okay? So someone, a member of one of my teams, will stand in the corner of the gallery with a stopwatch and will watch visitors as they move around. And it's very, very easy to spot these 4 categories. This is an example of a browser in one of our galleries looking at ancient Egypt. And Nebamun is the name of an ancient Egyptian official, and this gallery mainly contains paintings from the tomb, from his tomb, which talk about his life. And it compares them here to objects of daily life. Okay? So as you can see here, this visitor came in, they looked at this case first, they turned left, they spent, it tells you how long here, 2 minutes looking there, then they walked over here, 20 seconds in front of this case. They didn't do the case, you can see, they didn't do it in any order. They just looked through that room and went out again. I won't go through. Maybe afterwards, if you want to ask me more details about this sheet, I can talk through the details. For a follower, the next category, this is what a follower visit looks like. You can see how different. They come in, they look all around the gallery and leave. Yep. Recognizable. Yep. Funnily enough, many of our visitors don't do this. So you can see that by watching visitors, you can start to look at how they behave in a gallery. It is also important to talk to them, because you can watch this and then try and understand why they did it. And we do that as well. The other thing we mark down on here is how long people spend. We also mark down whether they are using different types of interpretation. Are they listening to an audio guide? If they have got an audio guide, they will take longer in front of some cases. Or do they? Do they look the same length of time and then carry on listening to the audio guide whilst they look in other cases? And if so, we need to think again about how our audio guides work, because there is then a disconnect between what they are seeing and what they are listening to. You see why it is so important to do this? The other thing we look at is, are they talking to other people? So if they have come with a friend and they are standing discussing, how does that influence their visiting pattern? We also have a level of engagement here, L1, L2, etc., L3, L4. And this is based upon watching how a visitor behaves when they are standing in front of a case. L1, level 1, is someone is just glancing at the case. They cannot possibly have enough time to focus. So a glance will be, yeah? L4, as well as being at least 40 seconds, is when people are studying an object carefully. You can tell that. If you watch, it's very easy. Yes? Yep, you get the idea. Reading the text, looking really carefully. It's important to note this because that is another indicator of engagement with an object. These are all indicators. They are not definite. They are the best that we have. Okay. There's another way of looking at indicators of engagement. And these next two slides are a bit complicated, so you do not need to take in all the information, just get the idea, yeah? So we have 4 categories, and this is based upon L1, L2, L3, L4. The first 2 categories are if visitors acknowledge or look at an object and move on, or if they briefly consider it. So level 2 is where someone might be going, yes? Do you see that in your museums? Yes, we see it in ours. We call those unsuccessful. We don't think those are a successful engagement. Successful ones are when people either spend 40 seconds or spend less time actually considering the object. Sometimes, when we do big exhibitions, we do a huge amount of watching visitors, talking to them, focus groups, so we can understand what has worked. And this next page is a direct copy of one of our reports that we get. Do not look at the details. This is just to show you the type of information that we get back so we can understand how visitors engage. So this was an exhibition which looked at Italian Renaissance drawings. And we had several sections. The exhibition maybe, I can't remember how many sections it had, but one of the sections looked like this. This is a map of the section. These are individual drawings. This is a film. This is a display case showing the materials that artists would have used. And this then is a chance to touch vellum and paper. Okay? And this is the main text panel for this section. And this is a secondary text panel for this section. And the first thing we know is the percentage of people who visited each of these objects. So just by glancing at this, you can see that the first drawing and the film and the chance to touch are the most popular things. The main text panel and the next 4 drawings and the display case are second, and this text panel is the least used part. So that's the first thing that tells us. The second thing is the depth of engagement. Remember the succeeded, failed from the last slide? That's what these tell us. This is this section. We got them to look at 6 sections, and this is this section, and as you can see, this completely succeeded because most visitors were either this one here, category 4, immersion, or this one here, discovery 3. So we know that section really worked because people spent a lot of time in here and engaged very deeply with a lot of the things. Further on in the exhibition, for example here, this section was less successful because only half the people engaged deeply, the other half didn't. So we then went back and asked, why didn't this section work as well as that? So you can see how that is really useful. And then we learn, and then the next exhibition we'll do something differently. This says, what interpretation did people use as well as looking at an object? And there are several different things. Did they read the text? Did they, I can't read those, but did they use the multimedia guide? There was a multimedia guide. Were they with other people? Did they discuss it? And you get the idea there. Yep. So that is for one area of a temporary exhibition. For our permanent galleries, and this is a permanent gallery for later Mesopotamia, which you will get translated, we look at the percentage of people who visit each of our cases. Okay? We have a lot of students who come and do this work for us. And I have to say here, thank you to the many, many students who have spent a lot of time watching visitors, talking to them, and then analyzing the data. So as you can see here, the cases that are seen by most visitors are this one here and this one here. And then you can see the cases that are seen by least visitors as well. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the empty case here, which had no objects in it, is not looked at by visitors. Not surprising that. And we have this for every gallery in our museum, or we are developing a program, so we will have this for every gallery. So this tells you the attracting power. So what is the percentage of people who see it? You can also ask, and I haven't got the data here, which is the first thing that people see? You can go back, analyze those charts, and ask, what is the first thing people see? You can also ask, which are the cases that people spend longest looking at? So you can ask lots and lots of different questions. Which are the cases that people spend time talking with other people about? Which are the cases that lead to the most conversation? You can see the importance of just asking these questions, and then you need to do more research to find out why and what is the impact of that conversation. Okay? So there are two really important things that come out of this. The first one is the introductory panel. And the importance or not. So this is what our introductory panels look like. They are at the entrance of every exhibition. They are right in front of you as you come in. You cannot miss them, and yet only at the most, as you can see here, 5% of people look at them. And this is not just our museum, it's many museums. And what we as museum professionals will do is put our most important information on the main panel in the room. And most of our visitors don't look at it or don't read it. And so most of our visitors do not know what the room is about. And generally, our visitors do not read text that is detached from objects. When text is next to a painting or an object, visitors will read it. If it's over there and there is not an object by it, people will not read it. Why should they? They're here to look at things. It's much more interesting looking at things than reading a big piece of text. And this is where I want to come back to the question of special exhibitions and permanent displays. Because visitor behavior is the opposite in the two types of display. In a special exhibition, often people have paid. They came to the museum just to see that exhibition. They are very motivated to see that exhibition. They come in our museum, they come expecting to be taken on a journey. They expect a narrative journey. The exhibition is not just lots of pretty things we have found and gathered together. The exhibition is carefully constructed to tell a story and tell a narrative. Visitors expect that, and so they will do what you tell them. They will want to do what you tell them. So they come into the exhibition and they do read the introductory panel. They do read the introductory panel. They then ask you, where do I start? Which is the first case I should look at? And they get annoyed if it is not obvious, because they think, that they are missing the story. Maybe they will find out the end by accident. They want to follow the story. So we know they start with the introductory panel, they then read the first section panel, they then look at an object, read the label. Look at the next object, read the label. We can predict in a special exhibition the way that visitors will move through that exhibition. We can predict what they have seen before. We know that they will follow a story. Yes? In our permanent displays, generally, the visitors behave in the opposite way. They do not read the panel. They come in, they look around, they choose what they want to look at. If it's interesting, yes, they will walk through it. Or if they have a research interest, they will use it. If not, they will choose the 2, 3, 4 things that look interesting and look at those. If they look at the object and read the panel, read the label and think, that's not very interesting, it hasn't told me very much, they will try that 1, 2 more times, and they will learn the behavior, and their learned behavior is that these are not worth reading. So they will stop reading. They will spend the rest of their visit not reading. They will just look at things. So we had a big surprise when all this research was done, because we used to make our special exhibitions and our permanent displays the same way. Our permanent displays would have the most important information on the panel, like a special exhibition. That would tell you why all these objects are gathered together in this room. That would tell you how to look at these objects and compare them, what to look for. And then the individual labels would give you a tiny amount of information, because in our permanent displays, we assumed visitors would read the panel, then look at the objects in order. And they don't do that. So what visitors were doing was they were not reading the panel, they were walking in, they were trying to guess, what's this room about? And then they would look at a few objects. They would look for information to give them a clue in the label. The label would just give them basic information, so they would make it up. They would say, oh, this must be a room about Africa. Yes, it's about Africa. And you're thinking, no. So what we have done is introduced a new concept, which is the concept of gateway objects. So what we said is that for our permanent displays, not for our special exhibitions are good, they work, they have a good impact on our visitors. But for our permanent displays, we will move the really important information away from the panel at the entrance that is not connected to objects. And we will move that important information next to the objects that we know visitors will look at. And in any gallery, in any permanent display, we are now starting to say which are the objects that visitors will look at and indeed should look at. How can we start to signal to visitors that these are the important objects they should look at? And then we move the important information by those objects. And so we say there are 3 things you need to worry about when choosing your key objects that you would like people to look at. And those 3 things, and those key objects, we call gateway objects. The first thing is we know that visitors go towards objects that are very beautiful. intrinsically attractive. They are attractive or beautiful in their own right. Attractive doesn't necessarily mean beautiful. It means that it attracts people in this sense. And we know the types of objects that attract people. They are big, often they are people, whether it's a sculpture of a person or a face, brightly coloured, unusual. You can also, famous. You can add in words yourself that make objects intrinsically attractive. The second thing is, we know that we have some very important objects in our collections. If visitors come to our museum and do not see the Rosetta Stone, it's one of our most important objects, then that is a problem. If people have come all the way from the Ukraine to the British Museum and have missed our most important objects, that is a problem. Yes? So, the gateway objects have to be important objects. And every curator will be able to say the most important objects they have. Ideally, they should also be intellectual gateways, which means that the object you have chosen allows you to introduce an area of the display. It has several stories and several things it illuminates about your display, about that area. So what we now do is we sit with the curators for a new permanent display and we ask, which are the gateway objects, the 5 or 6 gateway objects for this display? And we discuss it and we say, which are the ones that are so important visitors must not miss, and allow us to talk about an area of the display, and ideally are very attractive or will attract people in their own right. And if they can't, if they are a very ugly object or not very interesting object to look at, how can a designer make them attractive so that people want to look? And there are simple ways of doing that. You put it in a case by itself towards the center of the room. You send lots of design signals to visitors that the object is important. Yeah? And so what we now do is select our gateway objects and then make sure the really important information about the whole room is near those objects. And we have developed this further. So here is an image of one of our galleries. This is a gallery that looks at clocks. The main gateway for the whole gallery or permanent display is this here. It's a large clock. It has a screen in front of it, which also attracts visitors. It is in the middle of the room, and this information is the information that a long time ago we would have put on a panel at the entrance to the room. No one read it there. Many, many people start their visit here and read all of this. So they now know what the gallery is about. We now know what they have read. Fantastic. But we go further. We say that not only for a whole gallery, but for individual sections of the gallery, we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing. So we can write here the information which is about that section. And visitors recognize, because we test this, visitors recognize this clue that they should look at this first. So they will look at this, they recognize this is an important object which acts as a knowledge gateway to everything else in this case. So this works, and it has changed the way that visitors use our spaces. The last thing I will talk about, I will miss out all the rest, I will now talk about, there we go. The reason why I want to talk about this is because this is about impact. What is the impact of people engaging with your museum, your object, your display? And this is a model that was developed in the UK to think about impact. It's called learning outcomes. So it's the outcome of visitor engagement. It's called learning. I think it's not all about learning. I think it's a mix of things, so you can ignore that. Generic, I think, is a very important word because it's basically saying that these are not specific things. These are general categories of things, of impact that visitors could have after having visited your museum. And the important point here is that the impact of a visit is not just about knowledge. It's not just about increasing people's knowledge and increasing people's understanding. There are other impacts that a visit can have which are equally valid, and often are things that museums are better at than just putting across knowledge. Books, TV, lectures are good at putting across knowledge. Museums can do much, much more. Objects are much, much richer than just being about knowledge. We know that. We work in the sector. We need to use that more. So there are 5 categories. Knowledge, as we said, but skills. People can learn new skills. People can change their attitudes or their values. That can be an impact of a visit. It's not the same as knowledge. It's actually about changing yourself. People can be inspired, can stimulate their creativity, can enjoy themselves. That is an impact of a museum visit. They can change their behavior. They can do something different as a result of a visit. So it's not just about knowledge. And I'll go through each of these 5 categories very quickly. Let's start with knowledge. It's not just about learning new things. People can also deepen their understanding of a specific thing. So you may think you know a lot about Velázquez, but actually, if you spend longer looking at his works, you can deepen your understanding. Museums are very good at making links across things. If you put Western art and Eastern art in the same building, you can make links between those 2 types of art visually in ways that you could not normally do in other situations. We have objects from all around the world, across all time, in the British Museum. The links are absolutely phenomenal that people make and can make. Don't forget, people can also learn about your institution. They can learn about what museums are for, why museums are important, why museums do things the way they do. So it's not just learning about the objects. The second category, skills. People might be able to do, as a result of visiting, new things. Those might be about learning how to look at objects, learning how to look at paintings. Some people use museum visits for social skills. We have a lot of programs at the British Museum which are about how people relate to other people. Communication skills. People will be using their museum visit as a way of improving their communication, of learning how to involve others, for example. And then some museums can actually develop physical skills. Many of you will have programs where you teach people new skills, whether that's drawing or whether that's some kind of craft activity. A lot of museums, like science centres, can improve people's motor skills. So it's more than just learning knowledge, increasing knowledge. You could change people's feelings, their own self-esteem or attitudes to themselves, attitudes towards other people. If you cover cultures across the world, you start to do that in a museum. You can increase empathy with other cultures, tolerance, people's motivation. And moving on to motivation, as we said, people's creativity can be stimulated. Museums can often lead people to have innovative thoughts. They could be surprised. They could explore. They could be inspired. And actually, surely, a museum visit should be enjoyable. We love working in museums. We want to share our knowledge and love of our collection with other people. Let's make that fun. And finally, what do people go on to do? Can your museum visit lead people to do something differently? Are they so inspired by a view of the Japanese collection that they then read more about Japan or visit Japan? Are they so inspired by looking at the Egyptian collection that they want to visit other Egyptian collections and other museums? This does happen. We have evidence that this happens. Could your museum lead to such a change that people actually change the way that they manage their lives? It's a question I leave you with. So, I hope what I've done today is given you some ideas of why it is so important to know how your museum is impacting upon your visitors. I hope I have given you some clues as to how you can change your museum and your museum displays so you have more impact and you increase your visitor engagement. I will end by saying, I do not know all the answers. Every time we do more research, we discover new things. Visitors change. Digital technology is coming. That is changing how people use museums, how people see real objects, what people do with virtual objects. It's a really, really exciting time for all of us because there are some big changes coming along the way, and there always have been and there always will be. And that's what makes working in museums such an exciting thing. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Kсеркс, for such an interesting lecture. Now we will move on to questions, and I will switch to Ukrainian for that. Ми продовжимо з питаннями. У нас є близько 20 хвилин для питань зараз, а так само ми зможемо продовжити спілкування вже за кавою, і це знову ж таки питання.
Thank you. Dmitro Desiderik, the Day Daily newspaper. I have a little bit unusual question to you as a British museum person. So, how it was to give some power upon museum collections to such specific artists like Grayson Perry? Could you tell us about this unusual project? Thank you.
Okay. So, Grayson Perry is an artist in the UK, and we invited him to explore the British Museum's collection. He spent 2 years exploring the museum's collection and mounting a display of our collection under some very quirky and unusual categories. And he added some of the objects he had made himself. It was an extremely popular exhibition because partly he is a famous artist in the UK, but also it was a very, very intelligent exhibition. As an artist, he had a very strong eye for craftsmanship. He made some very interesting connections between the objects. He described those connections that he made. He was very non-precious about the objects we had, his objects. And what he actually did is he embodied what we say we're about. We say we're about helping people to make connections across cultures, across time, because you can do that under one roof in the British Museum. And by making connections, people can start to understand why the world is the way it is today and what their own place within that world is. So you start to understand your own identity by looking at objects from across the world, across time. And what Grayson Perry did was he took his own unique eye across the collections, and he illustrated how that can be done in a way that is very powerful and can be shared with many, many other visitors. And that's what museums are for. They're for people to come, to learn, to be inspired, to be emotionally engaged, and make connections between the objects on display and their own lives. Yep.
Питання, будь ласка.
Дмитро Заруба, Національний музей народної архітектури та побуту України. Пан Мазда, я хотів би, якщо можливо, там декілька хвилин, може одну-дві, все ж таки мапа особистих інтересів, логіка побутової Стоунхенджів, тобто в цих моделях, що це означає в вашій презентації? Дякую.
Okay. This was in the display. This was in the presentation because I was talking about how can you understand what visitors know already before you do a new display. And we do many things to test visitors' level of knowledge before we do a display. So we were doing a display about Stonehenge, which is this, circle of stones. And we tested visitors' knowledge in a way using something we call a personal meaning map. And this is a very simple personal meaning map. So what we did is we went to visitors and we said to them, okay, we will write the word Stonehenge in the middle. Now, write down everything that you think about when you think about Stonehenge. And visitors who didn't know very much or couldn't think of very much would write something like this. Stonehenge, outdoors, it is outside. It is a place to go. It is an attraction for a day out. When was it built? How was it built? Something to do with English history. Some visitors knew a lot more, so they would write this. Some visitors knew even more, And some visitors had a very complex knowledge. And you can tell it is complex because they've used quite long words. They've formed subcategories. Yep. And they've also done very different types of subject. And so the reason why it was in here is I was talking about this is a useful method to do because very quickly you get an idea of the knowledge and the intellectual knowledge map that visitors have in their own head about a subject. And this is even more complicated. But also, you can analyze these. So you can analyze them to look at the total. You can analyze them in 4 different ways. What is the quantity of different concepts people have in their head? What is the range? What are the different categories? So with Stonehenge, there's a whole set of things around how it is built, a whole set of things about why it is important, how it was used, how it relates to archaeology, for example. The third way of analysing it is the depth of knowledge. So not just the different types, but how deep is people's knowledge in each of those areas. Again, you can do that by looking at the level of the vocabulary. How many words do they use? How many cross-links are there? And there's a 4th way of analysing it, which is about how much have people mastered the whole concept based upon these other 3 things. And so what I was going to talk about, if I had time, was some of our findings. We found the types of words people associated with Stonehenge. We also knew that everyone could recognize it, but only a quarter of people really knew much about it. And if you don't speak English, you knew even less about it. And people were interested in the date, origin, location. People were interested in the archaeology. If you are older, if you are younger, you are interested in the more mysterious, religious, druid things about it. People don't know where it is. And people have many, many ideas about druids, but it is often ill-informed. So that was a huge amount of information we knew, which meant when we did our display, it started from this position. So that's why that was in there. The only other thing I would say is another way of testing if an exhibition has made an impact on people is, as people come in to your exhibition, you get them to do this. When people are leaving, you get the same people again, and you say to them, "Oh, you remember you did this for me on the way in? Would you like to change it or add to it now?" And people will add to it. And then you can ask them questions. And it is a useful tool to start to ask questions of people about how their experience in the exhibition has changed their thinking. Obviously, you have alerted them a little to the fact that you are interested in their learning in the exhibition, but through questioning, you can get a lot of information. Okay, I'll stop there.
Наступне питання, будь ласка.
Господин Мазда, можно ли попросить вас привести какой-нибудь конкретный пример экспозиции, выставки или какого-нибудь объекта, который был малопривлекателен до определенных изменений или неуспешен. Вот. И что вы сделали, чтобы привлечь зрителя к нему?
Yes. So we have, in one of our galleries, we have one of the oldest, the word is quern, which is basically a grinding stone that women in the Middle East would kneel down and would grind grain to make cereal to make food. And it looks very unattractive. It is or not unattractive, it just looks very uninteresting. It's just a stone with a hollow in the middle. And it was in a gallery with lots of very more attractive things. And we knew that it was one of the most important objects in that space because it was very ancient and it allowed us to say a lot of things about women's work and the kinds of illnesses and diseases and effects that so much work had on people. So we knew we had to make it more attractive. And we did it very simply by moving it in a case in the center of the room with bright lights shining on it. And we gave it more labels and people could walk around it. So it signaled to visitors that it was as important as the other objects, like you remember the mold gold cape I started with? Yep. So it was very near this object. So it signaled to people that it was as important in our eyes as this object. And when we researched, we found that that absolutely had changed. And visitors were looking at it and were learning much more from it.
Наступне питання, будь ласка.
You talked a lot about the motivation. And I wanted to ask you about what motivated British Museum to change. You said that change has started 20 years ago. So what are the pressures? External, internal? What are they? Thank you.
Very, very good question. It wasn't just the British Museum that changed. It was many, many museums that changed. And this is, what I am describing is a movement that happened across the UK. I think it was a mix of things. It was partly internal pressure that museums were increasingly conscious that we were putting things there for visitors and we didn't know whether they were having an impact on visitors. We were devoting our lives to putting exhibitions together. We would work really, really, really hard on exhibitions. And then we'd no idea whether they were succeeding, whether people were completely baffled by what they saw. We might get really good press about them. We would feel proud of them, but were they working? So it was an increasing interest in whether we were making successful displays. That was the first thing. The second thing is generally across the UK, there has been a greater focus on the consumer, the customer, the visitor. And this is very much part of that whole trend. And probably the third thing is in museums, there has been an increasing look at learning and education. And so this has partly come from learning and education. Okay.
Thank you. Наступне питання, будь ласка.
Вот вы говорили про ознакомительную панель, которая, я так и не поняла, экспериментально или регулярно выставляется в начале какой-либо экспозиции. Уточните, когда она играет в плюс, когда она помогает, когда она в минус. И еще такой момент. любой фон в экспозиции, музыка, тихая музыка, или еще какое-то регулярное видео, или на этой же ознакомительной панели видео вместо текста, как они работают на пользу посетителя и музея в том числе.
Дякую.
Very good questions. So the first one, introductory panel. Good if it is a temporary exhibition that people will spend time in and expect to be taken on a narrative. So if you are doing a temporary exhibition, you have advertised it as a separate thing, put your introductory panel. If it is a permanent display, people are much less likely to follow carefully, so they are less likely to read the panel. And in a museum like ours, we find 3% read the panel. So temporary exhibition, yes. Permanent display, no. Okay? In terms of video music, sound is a very difficult thing. A lot of visitors find sound distracting to a visit. That's what we find, especially spoken word. So if you have a video with the spoken word, you have to be very conscious about that sound leaking into other spaces. Even music can be distracting to some visitors. It's interesting because whenever we ask visitors what they would like in an exhibition, they will always say, and you can have the sounds and the smells of the Middle East, or you can, and actually we know now that if you do that, visitors get very annoyed. So it's a nice idea, but sometimes people find it annoying. And the thing about sound is you can't stop it. The thing about things you look at, you can choose not to look at them. So with video, videos tend to attract visitors. So if you have a video or a computer screen, that will be something that will be much more attractive to visitors than text, for example. So you use them carefully. If you want to attract visitors to a part of your gallery, then use a video or a screen, a touch screen. And think really carefully about why you are using it. Don't be led by the video, by the technology. Be led by what you want to say. Is it said best through a short video, or is it said best with words or with a picture, an image? Finally, in 5 or 10 years' time, it will be normal, or maybe even sooner, it will be normal for most visitors to come into museums with a phone or a tablet or portable technology. How will that change the nature of a visit? How will that change where we put videos? Should we be putting them on screens in galleries, or should we actually find a way of streaming them onto people's phones? There are technical things which need to change, but they will change. Museums may not lead those changes, but shops or airports or train stations will, and visitors will start to expect things in museums. And so we need to be aware, as a sector across the world, of those technology changes and use them when they are useful to us.
Чи є в нас ще питання? Так, будь ласка.
Пан Мазда, звичайно, Британський музей – це світовий бренд, але, напевно, ви особливо для тематичних яких експозицій, тимчасових, співпрацюєте активно з пресою. І от чи досліджували ви вплив оцінок журналістів, експертів на відвідуваність виставок? Да? Чи є тут такий безпосередній вплив, чи заохочує це ваших відвідувачів приходити активніше на виставку? Якась кількість, велика кількість позитивних публікацій, наприклад?
Дякую.
Yes, so we work a lot with the press to talk about our exhibitions and our permanent displays and our education programs. It's really important to do that because it helps fill in things, information that visitors cannot get in other ways before they come to the museum. So the press will allow you to, or will explore other stories. What we tend to find is that the press takes very interesting angles. They will rarely just write something that says this is good or this is bad. What they will do is use the subjects that we cover to explore new angles or new interesting ideas. So what we are doing through our exhibition is generating discussion around the subject in all kinds of interesting ways. And that's what we like doing, is catalyzing discussion and debate. So the experience of an exhibition expands out. You ask the question, does it directly influence visiting? And the picture is very complicated because often many different types of marketing and press work together, and it is hard to separate out the effects of one and the other. So visitors might see a poster, then they might read an article, then they might be told by a friend, I'm going to this excellent exhibition. They might be on social media, and they might be a Facebook friend of ours and hear more about that, the exhibition, through Facebook. They might then come to our website and look at one of our promotional videos about the exhibition. The order they do that in and how those different components reinforce each other is very complicated. But you are absolutely right that the press writing interesting articles about our exhibitions is a very powerful part of that mix. So, thank you.
Thank you. Чи в нас є ще питання?
We know that in 2009, I think you opened an interactive learning center together with Samsung. So my question is, in a nutshell, can you tell what the operations are and whether it helps you to engage with your visitors? And if yes, to what extent? Thank you. Interactive Learning Center. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I worked in the Science Museum in London for 13 years, and that is a museum full of interactives and interactive centres. I think the interactive learning centres have an incredibly important place to play in a lot of museums. There's one question, which is, who is it for? And is it best placed together as one room or better separated out throughout the museum? And there are pluses and minuses for those two things. And it depends on your museum. If your museum has a large collection, then you need to think about, are you keeping a lot of visitors in a room away from your objects? And is that the right thing to do? Or can you encourage people to visit your collection by having interactive learning in each of your galleries? If you have that, then will that distract other visitors? And so that's the first question. Maybe Interactive Learning Centre works best for you because of the staffing, that you cannot afford to have staff spread throughout the museum. You have to have them all together. Maybe it works better for schools, but I would argue that in an object-based museum, you want your school children to be in front of the collection as much as they can, because that is the thing you provide that is unique. So I think interactive learning centres are very, very powerful, and all the evidence is people love them, they are very popular, and you get very, very strong learning from them. My big question is around whether it should be a centre or spread across the museum. But interactivity is a powerful learning tool. Absolutely, a very powerful learning tool. Again, ask yourself why you are doing it. Is the message you are getting across best done through an interactive, or is it better done in other ways? Interactives are quite expensive, and they cost a lot to keep running. So is that the best use of your money? But overall, when they work incredibly well. Is that okay?
Останнє питання, будь ласка. І я нагадаю, що після цього ми зможемо поспілкуватись за кавою, так що не засмучуйтесь.
Лілія Казанцева, астрономічний музей університету Шевченка. Чи досліджували ви, яким чином впливає віртуальна колекція, віртуальний показ колекції на відвідування? Більше цікавості до колекції чи менше?
Okay. We've done some research, but I have to confess there is a lot more research to do, and I am very, very interested in this area. There is no evidence that if you put your collection online, people will stop coming to your museum. There is no evidence of that. If you put your collection online and people can research it, you are much more likely to encourage people to visit, because they want to see the actual thing. They have just seen it online. That's not the same as seeing the actual thing. So there, as I say, please don't let that be the reason that you don't put your collection online. If you put your collection online, universities are far more likely to use your objects as examples in their lectures. So students will learn about them and will want to come and see them. If your collection is online and people Google to look for examples of objects, they will pull those up, they will read about them, and they will then want to come and see them. So all you are doing is adding for people's thirst for that emotional connection with an object they now know about and they want to see. The thing that really interests me is how virtual objects and real objects can work together to produce something that is stronger than both of them. People always talk about virtual objects as if they are a poor and lesser shadow of the real object. I would argue that they're not. They're just different. There are things that virtual objects can do that are much better and easier than standing in front of the real object. You can blow up an object on a screen and look at the details much easier than you can if it's in a case badly lit, at the back of a case, even if it is well lit. You can compare objects on the screen in a way that you can't if one object is here, one object is in Britain, one object is in China. And those are just two examples. So I think that as museum professionals, we need to find ways of using the fantastic opportunities and the strengths of digital objects. And I don't think we've even started to do that.
Thank
Okay.
you. Дякую дуже за лекцію. Thank you so much for the lecture.